Everyone loves a snack. It's in our nature, but do it in a healthy way and get all-natural healthy snacks from Naturebox. With snacks like blueberry nom-noms, strawberry Greek yogurt pretzels, and Country Ranch sunflower kernels for those sunflower seed addicts, FBIA podcast listeners will get a free month and snack when they go to FBIApodcast.com website and click the Naturebox banner at the bottom of the page.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Football is America with Ron and Kyle. I'm Ron.
And I'm Kyle. Today we are joined by Christopher Gates, who is part of the managing editing team for the DailyNorseman.com, which is the SB Nation community for the Minnesota Vikings. We have Chris here today to discuss the team, the future, his thoughts, and the always reasonable and rational fan option today. Christopher, thank you for joining us. Skol!
Well, thank you very much for having me, gentlemen. I appreciate being here.
Now, it's especially cool for us to have Chris here doing this with us because Chris is actually in Germany right now. He is that much of a fan of the Vikings, he goes to the fatherland for it. Now, granted, he had to go through the military to do that, but still, credit where it's due. Thank you for your service. You want to tell us a little bit about what are you doing in Germany?
Well,
or the is it Army or Air Force that you're in?
Air Force, actually.
All right.
Over here, stationed at beautiful Spangdahlem Air Base. Been here a little more than a year. Going to be here for another year and a half or so. And yeah, this is actually a really nice place.
I know from my term in service, never heard anything bad about Germany, other than you might go back home with a wife.
Well, I came here with one, so that's not an issue.
Well, then you're insulated.
Yes.
Well, we definitely thank you for your service. Ron and I were both 10-year Army vets ourselves, and we know kind of how the extra little bit of sacrifice goes there, especially overseas and in foreign countries. I know what the tax is for a wife there, especially. Now, how long have you been a fan of the team?
I'm going on about 30 years. The first year I was really old enough to care about football was the year that I turned 8. Unfortunately, that team that season was generally regarded as the worst team in franchise history. That was the year they went 3-13 with Les Steckel as the head coach, and they spent the last half of the season just getting demolished week in and week out. Everybody hated the coach, and yeah, he wound up getting fired, and they determined that they screwed things up so badly that they had to bring Bud Grant back for one more year to fix things before they passed it on to Jerry Burns. But that was the first year I was a fan, and now it's 2015. So yeah, a little more than 30 years of Vikings fandom for me.
Definitely allows you to have some perspective, I imagine, with things. When that's your start, like as bad as the team is within recent memory, a few years later, like 8-8, could be worse.
Mm-hmm. And a couple years after that was the year they got to. There was the strike year. They wound up in the NFC Championship game, and as is the Vikings' way, they came close and couldn't quite get there. But yeah, they're never let it be said that the Minnesota Vikings aren't entertaining in some way or another.
True enough. And what is it exactly that drove you to be a professional sports writer? I mean, is this just you're such a diehard fan or just part of the SB community? I mean, what is the motivation there for you, especially in a whole nother time zone? I mean that's got to be rough.
It's just kind of something I've enjoyed doing. I've had a passion for writing ever since I was in high school. And, back in the dark ages when I was in high school, we didn't have the internet and 24-hour sports news and text messaging and all that other good stuff. But, it's just something I've kind of enjoyed doing. And, I can't remember exactly when it was, mid 2006-ish or so. I was bumming around and found Windy City Gridiron, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. That's the Chicago Bears site on SB Nation, and just kind of reading along and said, I could probably do something like this, and sent in a thing to SB Nation, asked me if they wanted a Vikings writer, and like I said, about 9 years later, here I sit, still doing the same thing.
And it's got to be a little bit more taxing now, managing and editing and posting articles, getting the information. I was stationed in Italy for 3 years, and I'd often find that the way that the news would work is wake up, all of the articles from yesterday are there all at once, boom, 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 and then no updates the rest of the day. And you've got to produce articles now. So how much more taxing is it being in Germany and managing this site?
It's a little bit more so because, like you say, I generally when I wake up, it's, 6 o'clock in the morning over here. Well, it's just hitting midnight back on the East Coast and in the central time zone in the US. So there's nothing going on then. And, throughout the day, there's really nothing going on. Then when you get home from, your primary job, then that's the time everything's just kind of firing up back in the States, and you have to keep an eye on stuff. Fortunately, we have a team of really awesome folks that monitor all this stuff as well, and it so happens that I can't get to something generally someone else can. Although I will say that this is a whole lot better than before I got to Germany, because before I got here, I spent a year in Korea, and I was still running the site then. And the running joke was, well, whenever Chris goes to bed, something happens. And that's kind of the way it was, because, the one I remember is I went to, was getting ready to go to sleep one night, and all of a sudden I get a Gmail message over my phone. Oh, by the way, Percy Harvin just got traded to Seattle. Get up and start typing away for an hour or so and try to go back to sleep. And it's a little different, but, it's still pretty enjoyable. You still get all the news, still get all the interaction. It just kind of happens on a slightly different rhythm than it does for everyone else, I guess.
So I suppose if you got offered a continental U.S. posting, you might be willing to accept it then, or at least give it that consideration. Going Oconus all the time.
Well, this is the first time, or the second overseas assignment I've had since I've taken over the site. I was the first season we were part of SB Nation was the 2006 season, and the 2012, the end of the 2012 season, most of the 2013 season, and then the 2014 season are the ones I've been overseas for.
What has been your strongest Vikings memory? I mean, good, bad, in between. What has been the thing that stands out to you the most? Your strongest memory as a fan of this team?
Since the site's come online, probably the whole 2009 season, I guess. I mean, I hate to cop out like that and take an entire season, but I mean, we had
No, that's a perfectly fine answer. I mean, that, sometimes it's not one game or one play, but the composition of a whole year.
Yeah, because I mean, we had the whole drama with Favre in 2009, going into the preseason, whether or not he'd sign. Then they signed him, and then we had all the ups and downs, going 12-4, and then there was blowing the Cowboys out in the divisional round of the playoffs, and everyone was riding high. And then we got to the NFC Championship game, and everyone kind of forgot what happened after that. So as far as we knew, that season ended with the Vikings beating the Cowboys in the divisional round. The NFC Championship game did not actually happen.
I'm sure you guys have lots and lots of comments when it comes to the whole Bountygate thing, where they were trying to knock Favre out of the game and stuff like that too.
Yeah, it came out a couple of years later. I mean, obviously it's too late to do anything about it, really. But to say that we were displeased about that would be an understatement. I mean, I understand that the Vikings had an opportunity to win that game despite all of that, but when you have something that was that emotional and it came down to one or two plays, and then you find out that whole thing was going on. It wasn't great. I'll say that. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Honestly, we could sit here and talk about the history of the Vikings because they have a very, very fun history. Your team has had some incredibly big highs and some incredibly big lows as well over the last, basically the last 20 years or so, to be honest.
Yes.
Everything from Dante Culpepper and Randy Moss days to the fast forward more, and you get into that Brett Favre we've been talking about. More recently, the new era of the Teddy Bridgewater, and now we have the Adrian Peterson saga. And you are kind of tasked with making sense of all of it. And fans rely on you to tell it like it is, but also give them more of a sense of hope. So now that we look back on last year, we have seen some big positives and some big negatives when it comes to the Vikings. Kyle and I often differ, it seems, on some of the issues surrounding the team. If you're looking back on the year and sifting through all the grainy sand that was the Vikings season, can you kind of pick out those pieces of gold and tell us where the successes were, or if there were any at all?
Well, I mean, if you would have told Vikings fans going into the 2014 season, okay, here's what's going to happen. Adrian Peterson is going to play one game, and then you're not going to have him for the rest of the season. Cordero Patterson, rather than making the huge jump that everyone expected him to make, is still going to be awful. You're going to lose your starting quarterback after 2.5 games, and all the other stuff that happened. If you told the Viking fans all that stuff going into 2014, I think they would be perfectly happy with 7-9. And because a lot of the preseason projections for the Vikings were predicting 3 wins, 4 wins, whatever. And that was with the full season of Adrian Peterson, with Cordero Patterson actually stepping up and being the kind of receiver everyone was sort of expecting him to be last year. So for the Vikings to have had everything happen to them last year that they had happen, and to still come out with a 7-9 record and a vastly improved defense from the season before, I think just about every Viking fan probably would have taken that.
So the season as a whole can be considered a success then, as you said, given expectations and the reality. I mean, when you exceed your expectations by about twice as many wins as you're projected, you got to feel fairly happy with that, even if it's not 800 or 500.
I would think so because, like I said, this is a very young football team. And they were expected to be centered around Adrian Peterson. The plan was for Teddy Bridgewater to be able to sit for a season and watch, and instead he's thrown into the lineup after 2 games and 1 quarter of the 3rd game. And, there are a lot more things, in my opinion, to be optimistic about the Minnesota Vikings about going into this next season than there are for them to be negative about.
In the league, coaching staff has been, for the longest, it seems, sort of a win now mentality. Gone were the days of you get a coach, he's there 4 years, good, bad, whatever. You give him the time. It shifted to sort of the Al Davis, what can you do for me in 2 years? Nothing, you're gone. And now we're starting to get back to that stability. So you recently had some head coaching and some regime change. How are you liking the new coaching staff? And I mean, obviously they had a good deal of success. So what is the expectation going into next season for this coaching staff? I mean, where are you looking for their play calling and schemes to improve?
Well, everybody seems to like Mike Zimmer, and with good reason, because the 2013 Vikings defense was a disaster. They were giving up 30 points a game. They weren't generating any turnovers. They weren't getting any stops. And Zimmer comes in with his scheme. We got rid of a few guys. Jared Allen, obviously the biggest name, wound up going to Chicago. Kevin Williams, who was in the middle of the line for over a decade, took himself to Seattle. But, the personnel changes and the changes on defense, this was a vastly improved defense this past season, and that was with them having to make adjustments to the new Zimmer scheme, which is a lot different than the kind of bland, vanilla, everything cover 2 that they had played in the previous few seasons. And, we're expecting that now that everybody's had a year in the scheme, maybe get a couple of younger guys on defense and, kind of get rid of some of the old blood. And hopefully that the defense will continue to improve, because as the defense continues to improve, the offense, which is still very young, is going to have time to improve as well.
Now, you brought up defense and stuff, and we see a lot that the offense is the key and had been for the past few years, obviously with Adrian Peterson. And it seems like the defense was always the weak link, like you said, and what kind of lost you a lot of those games, despite Adrian Peterson, rushing for thousands of yards. This year, the D did step up and become more of a strength than the offense. What was the difference maker there?
I think it's Mike Zimmer, to be completely honest. I mean, we look back at I can't remember who put the article out from ESPN, but they were talking about play calling responsibilities among the NFL head coaches. And I believe the number of head coaches that still call their own plays, I want to say was about 10. However, if you look at those 10 head coaches, there are only 2 head coaches in the National Football League that call defensive plays. One is Mike Zimmer, who calls the defense in Minnesota, and the other one is Rex Ryan, who lost his job with the Jets and is now in Buffalo. But all the other head coaches that still call their own plays in the NFL are on the offensive side of the ball, with the exception of those 2 guys. And he's getting the kind of guys that he wants in his defense in there. Like I said, Jared Allen went away, went to Chicago, and everyone was skeptical about giving a huge money contract to someone like Everson Griffin, who had only started 1 game in the previous 4 years and they gave him this big contract, and everyone was like, well, what the heck are they doing? And it came out, that in this Zimmer defense, Everson Griffin might have been the best overall player on the defensive side of the ball because of what the schemes were allowing him to do. He was good against the run, good against the pass. And, the Vikings are bringing in these guys that fit the kind of defense that Mike Zimmer wants to run. And prior to that, under Leslie Frazier, everything was just kind of, okay, we're gonna rely on the front 4 to do everything. Secondary is just gonna kind of hang back in that same weak, soft zone, and it just killed them in 2013. And Zimmer wasn't gonna have any of that, and we've seen a pretty drastic change as a result.
Everson Griffin was definitely a pleasant surprise for the year. I remember distinctly, I can't remember the week exactly, but I remember distinctly we're doing our show and we're both talking about who is our most impressive player of the week. And it was like the only week we did that because we're inconsistent morons. And we both came to Everson Griffin on defense, and then we're like, wait a minute. Who the hell is Everson Griffin? How do we not know who this guy is? So then instant research, like all the facts, number 100 overall pick, 4th round guy. Like how do we not know about him? And he has this amazing year, snubbed for the Pro Bowl, definitely. Because if you have a year like that again, you're looking at maybe getting an All-Pro kind of nod. How did he do this? Where did he come from? What happened here?
He had gotten a lot of time on the field. He was primarily being brought in pass rushing situations. There were times he would sub in and play the defensive tackle spot. The 2012 season finale against the Packers, it was a situation where if the Vikings win, they go to the playoffs, and the Vikings lose, they go home. Griffin had 3 sacks that game. And, he gets on the field. He wasn't going to start, or he hadn't been starting because, well, obviously Jared Allen was on one side, and you're not paying him $15 million to sit on the bench. And over on the other side, we have Brian Robinson, who, while he isn't spectacular, was still pretty solid. And he just couldn't get on the field except for in like sub-package situations and things like that. The guy has always been a freak athletically. I mean, you watch him, some of his highlights, he's running down plays in the backfield that dudes his size have no business running down. And, he finally got his opportunity. And, like I said, this last off season, the Vikings had an opportunity to pursue guys like Michael Johnson and, possibly keep Jared out, whatever. But Zimmer just basically said, no, this Griffin guy is going to be something pretty spectacular for us. Let's give him our money. And yeah, he repaid him with the type of season he had.
Definitely a return on investment there. And he really kind of like, okay, the Vikings fans maybe know Everson Griffin, but for the rest of us, it was this surprise, this guy kind of almost coming out of nowhere that maybe he had production, but not getting mentioned in the news. And it seems that way for the whole defense. This is almost the no-name defense going out there, and they actually played really solid and consistent all year. So that's got to be a great feeling right now to know that your head coach is able to get the guys to buy in, to play well, and it works. I mean, that has got to be a great, secure feeling going into next year for all Vikings fans.
It is, and it's not like the defense doesn't have talent. I mean, I'm sure there are some guys that, the more quote unquote casual fans would know about, guys like Harrison Smith. Chad Greenway, who has really declined the past couple of years, but has been around long enough where people probably know who he is. But yeah, for the most part, like I said, this defense is very young. They're very talented, and under Zimmer, I think they're going to start looking for more athletic type of guys like Anthony Barr, who they took last year. The book on Anthony Barr was that he was going to be used as primarily a pass rusher just to get his athleticism on the field. But from week one, they asked him to do all sorts of things that a normal 4-3 outside linebacker would do. And he had his issues in coverage, but people forget that his first 2 years at UCLA, he was a running back, and then UCLA switched him to the defensive side of the ball. So he's only really been a linebacker for 3 years. And, with all that athletic ability he has, he's just going to continue getting better as he gets more experience at the position.
Yeah, it's definitely dangerous. You got a linebacker, and Everson Griffin was a running back in high school, running back and defensive line. Odd that a high school football coach would say, yeah, body type for both. Why not? But hey, as long as they're out there wrecking games, you guys aren't complaining. Now let's talk offense. I love offense. Not been a solid quarterback drafted since Dante Culpepper. Christian Ponder was not the guy, but now you got Teddy Bridgewater. How excited were the fans? Obviously you take Barr. That is the smart move. Get that defense adjustment. Sitting at that high pick, you get that value pick. Trade up. All you essentially lost was a 4th round pick to get this guy. That had to be feeling like a steal. Were you watching the draft?
We were. I was watching the draft over here, and you're watching the coverage, and the guys at the desk, and I was watching on the NFL Network feed through my Game Pass, whatever. So I'm watching it, and the NFL Network guys are like, "Oh, the Seahawks are on the board, last pick of the first round, and there are several teams trying to trade up, and yada yada yada." And you're watching, and all of a sudden the little logo on the bottom of the screen changes from a Seahawks logo to a Vikings logo. And, we're like, there's only one guy on the board at that point that you figured they were trading up for. And you knew it was Bridgewater at that point, because everyone's saying to themselves, okay, Houston has the first pick of the second round. And, if the Vikings hadn't taken Bridgewater at 32, there's absolutely no doubt that Bridgewater would have been the first pick of the second round, because Houston wasn't going to pass on him again.
Oh, but, definitely. And as a Colts fan, I am very happy for the Vikings for that. Thank you guys so much.
It was amazing. To this day, after watching all of the tape and stuff that we watched on Bridgewater leading up to the draft and all the highlights and whatnot, it just blows my mind that there are professional scouts who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this for a living that said, I think if we need a quarterback to build our franchise around, that we should probably take Johnny Manziel instead of Teddy Bridgewater, because that's the kind of thing that gets personnel people fired.
And you had some people going just off of college game tape going, this kid, it's not enough time to really be fair, but the best prospect scouted since Andrew Luck. But even then it's like, look, you remove Andrew Luck, you got to go really far back. I want to say Matt Miller, the lead scout reporter for Bleacher Report, said that he was the second best prospect at quarterback he had ever scouted. And yeah, there's definitely excitement there. So have a bad pro day, whatever, it's fine. Vikings definitely cleaned up there, and Teddy Bridgewater has got, he is good. Now he had some good stats, but they can be deceiving. he did have 4 games in a row with over 70% completion percentage. Now, was he really as successful or as bad as his game stats indicate? We know rookies have some morning games. They make some rookie mistakes, but does he look as good as
I think he does. I mean, he definitely looked better as the year went on. I mean, he had his first start against Atlanta, threw for over 300 yards. Didn't actually have a passing touchdown, but the Vikings still put up 41 points that game. And I know the Atlanta defense isn't great or anything like that, but still putting up 40 points in your first ever NFL start is fairly impressive. And then he had the foot injury in the Atlanta game, so he sat out the Thursday night game against Green Bay where Minnesota got hammered. And he came back the next 2 weeks and had a couple of bad games against Detroit and against Buffalo. But after that, you could see the improvement in Teddy Bridgewater pretty much every single week. I mean, yeah, he still threw some passes that you wish he wouldn't have and still made a couple rookie mistakes. But, given the state of the Vikings offensive line this past season, not having Adrian Peterson to take a lot of heat off of him, there are lots of reasons to be excited for Teddy Bridgewater's development going forward. And everyone is expecting big things from him in 2015, and with good reason, I think.
You could say either him or Carr. That is the rookie quarterback winner of last year. And it depends on who you talk to. I think Bridgewater's got the brighter future, though. And I got to assume that for Viking fans, I mean, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have anything in this league. So this has got to give you such a cautious new optimism going into this next season. Like, we've got something critical figured out, and hopefully this kid can work out for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, is that almost a new feeling? I mean, the Vikings are not known for quarterback play, and here you have this guy, and he looks to be...
It really is, because, most of the Denny Green era, I remember the Denny Green era, and I've looked this stat up a few times before. Denny Green was the head coach of the Vikings for 10 years, and I believe in those 10 years, he had 9 different quarterbacks that led the team in passing, just because his philosophy was, okay, I can get any quarterback to come in and run this system, and we'll be just fine. And, ever since then, it's just been sort of a patchwork operation at quarterback for the Vikings. This team's only drafted, counting Bridgewater, they've only drafted 4 quarterbacks in the first round in their history. They drafted Tommy Kramer back in the 70s, and then there was Culpepper and Ponder, and now Bridgewater. And other than that, all of their quarterbacks have just been sort of, free agent guys, patchwork guys. You get zombie Brett Favre for a year. He performs pretty well. And, for this team to have something at the quarterback position that looks like he could be the guy, like you said, for 10, 12, 15 years, it's really a weird feeling, because you'd go into the off season as a Vikings fan every year, and the question was, okay, what are we going to do at quarterback this time around? And now the biggest issue we have at the quarterback spot is who's going to back up Teddy Bridgewater, or do we use like a 5th or 6th round pick on a guy who could potentially sit and learn to be Bridgewater's backup? We are of the impression that we have the guy for the next 10 to 12 years. And like you said, that it's just such a feeling that, it just kind of allows you to focus on everything else, because you don't have to worry about that most important spot anymore.
Yeah, but you guys brought in Sean Hill, and I guess the way I looked at it was I was confused by it at first, because like, wow, that's 2 very different offenses you'd have to run there. But if nothing else, Sean Hill brings a very, very, very good veteran mentorship to the position that Teddy Bridgewater probably, in my opinion, after watching him play last year, that just seems to be what he needs the most, is just a little bit more guidance from somebody who has been a current player in the game for the last few years.
It really is, and that's kind of what Matt Castle was probably going to end up being this year. Unfortunately, Matt Castle was set to make about $4.5 million this year to sit and mentor Teddy Bridgewater, and the Vikings decided that was a little too much, so they flipped him to the Bills, where Castle is going to have an opportunity to start in Buffalo, I think. But it was pretty clear after week 4 that this is Teddy Bridgewater's team, and anybody else that's on the quarterback depth chart is competing for second and third string snaps, basically. So they shipped Castle out, and they brought in Sean Hill, who's a little cheaper, a little older, has worked with Norv Turner a little bit before. And so all those things, I think, went into Sean Hill now being the backup for the Vikings at quarterback rather than Bridgewater.
Now, you were just talking about Dennis Green. For so long, the Vikings have been in this situation where personnel issues and lack of talent at key positions are just kind of the norm. And as frustrating as that be, that was just the expectation. Now, what are the top concerns that the staff should be addressing this offseason? You know, the big needs and all that. You've got about $8.5 million left in cap space. So, I mean, looking at the personnel limitations, the schemes, you know, what can you tell us needs to be individual area of improvement that they can still target potentially through the draft or even still through free agency?
The first thing they need to do is restructure Chad Greenway's contract or get rid of Chad Greenway, because Greenway has been bad for at least the last 2 years, maybe the last 3, depending on what sort of metrics you look at. And that guy is scheduled to make about $8 million next year. And given what happened yesterday with the release of Greg Jennings, it kind of confuses me that Greg Jennings is no longer a Minnesota Viking and Chad Greenway still is. And that goes into what the biggest weakness on the defensive side of the ball is, and that's probably the linebacker position. We've got Barr at linebacker, who is solid and looks like he's going to be something pretty special going forward. But outside of Anthony Barr, there's a lot of question marks at linebacker. Gerald Hodges stepped in last year when Greenway was injured and performed pretty well. Don't know what we're going to do in the middle yet. Jasper Brinkley moved on to Dallas. Audie Cole has gotten some opportunities and had a great game in Week 17 against the Bears. But there's a lot of question marks at the linebacker position. A lot of it has to do with age and inexperience. But that is the one place on the defensive side of the ball that really needs to be shored up at this point. And on offense, we have to look at the offensive line and the issues they had last year. They lost their entire starting right side over the course of the season to injuries. Charlie Johnson has been released, who was the starting left guard last year. Left guard is probably the most urgent need on the offensive line. And then there's the hope that Matt Khalil can get back to what he was as a rookie, because for the first half of 2014, he was awful. I mean, there were dudes just...
Yeah, we actually dug
shocking.
into him a little during the season, because we were like, what happened to this? Like, what happened here? It just seemed like it was like just a cliff dive.
And I mean, he was looking like he was going to be one of the best left tackles in the league, and then his rookie year kind of confirmed that. And then,
and with Khalil, I don't know how much of it is physical. I don't know how much of it is mental. Apparently, he was dealing with a knee injury early on the season. It got better as the season went on, which seems kind of weird, I guess. But over the last 5 or 6 games of the season, he did improve his play quite a bit. And as we're accustomed to in Minnesota, that gives us just enough hope to see whether or not he can be the guy going forward. They have the decision on his 5th-year option that comes up on, I believe it's May 3rd, is the day after the draft. And because he was a top 10 pick, the cost of his option is going to be something like $11 million if they pick it up, but it's only guaranteed against injuries. So they have to see if Matt Khalil is going to get it together, because if he gets it together, that makes the rest of the offensive line better. We're probably going to have someone young starting at left guard, whether they draft someone or a guy like David Yankee, who they drafted last year, steps up and takes over the position. But Khalil getting better would really solidify things on the offensive line for this team, I think.
I have a quick question for you. How happy are you that they got rid of Christian Ponder?
I will say I was pretty much the last Christian Ponder supporter on the planet.
Wow, really? That surprises me, because there's not many.
he was so bad, though.
I know he was.
Like, the game he was in this year was like, dude, you can't do any of what you're doing.
No.
And you're doing all of what you're doing.
No.
And It's like when you're at Little League and the kid just doesn't get it and his parents have to sit there and they're like, we got to walk back to the car with this kid. They're all going to know that it's our genetics. And it's like the whole stadium was his parents, like awkward and terrible. It was beautiful because I'm not a Vikings fan.
It was awful. And, he had a lot of ups and downs in Minnesota. He did play well toward the end of the 2012 season. And you can argue how much of that was Adrian Peterson just, destroying everything in his path during that season. But he was a big part of the game that got the Vikings into the playoffs. And then he was the starter going into 2013, and he looked awful, and he got hurt. And we had the Josh Freeman experience, which was about as awful as I've ever seen. And we went back to Ponder, and then we went back to Castle, and
got you to Teddy Bridgewater, though. So, I mean, if that's what it takes, then
it did. So you can't completely hate the guy if, Teddy Bridgewater is the end result. So, but I'm going to Oakland for Ponder is, I think, just about the best thing that could have happened to him. And he's going back to an offense he knows. He's at the point where there's going to be no pressure, no expectations on him. And, he can just sort of relax and try to salvage what's left of his career. The guy has the smarts to be a solid backup quarterback in this league. And you can say he was a bust or whatever, and he was from the classical definition standpoint of that. But I mean, it's not Christian Ponder's fault that the Minnesota Vikings decided that he was worth the 12th overall pick in the draft. He probably wasn't. He probably should have been a second-round pick. I don't know if he would have been around for the Vikings second-round pick if they hadn't taken him where he did. But, that's just the way things work out in the National Football League sometimes, I guess.
Absolutely. And it seems like the Vikings were not the only team that suffered that year in terms of playing that hype game. I mean, that hype game definitely helped in terms of reducing the value of a Teddy Bridgewater, allowing you to take him late in the first. Mm-hmm. But it increased not just Christian Ponder, but also Jake Locker and the amazing Blaine Gabbert. I mean, those were all guys where you look back and you're like, that's just what the hype machine did. Mm-hmm. And recently, keeping with the hype machine, that has been focused in the North all on running back. Now, for a while, that was good, getting, 8 yards away from breaking records. Mm-hmm. But recently, it is very, very negative. Now, I mean, it's without getting too much into what he did, because we all know what he did. Mm-hmm. One of the shocking things is the NFL just cannot get it right when it comes to how much trouble he is in, whether he's going to be allowed to play or not, and just the drama going on there. What you know better than us, where exactly is Adrian Peterson right now in terms of coming back? Is the NFL totally set and keeping him out for the year? Has he won yet? It seems to change minute by minute and appeal by appeal. So where is he right now in terms of coming back?
Well, basically what happens, or what's going on now, he's still on what's called the commissioner's exempt list, which means, he can't visit the team. He can't, if there were practices going on, he wouldn't be able to take part in practices. He can have contact with the team, which is different from what the case was during the season, when he apparently was not allowed to have contact with the team because he was suspended. Now, the first hearing the first opportunity for him to potentially be reinstated to the league was supposed to be April 15th. That was the first day where Roger Goodell could, give his blessing and say, all right, you're officially back, blah, 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 whatever. Now they've had all these cases in court, and there's an appeal going to some federal circuit court. The briefs for that aren't going to get heard until May. So I don't know if that's going to run into the April 15th date where he could potentially be reinstated. If the NFL is even going to reinstate him, apparently the National Football League had a list of things that he needed to do to get reinstated. I haven't seen that list. I don't have any idea what any of those things are. But, it's not so much whether or not the guy comes back to the Vikings or whatever. But you say what you will about the way the Vikings handled the situation with deactivating him for week 2 and then saying he was going to play again and then eventually pulling him back, whatever. Whether they stumbled over it or whether or not they did it on purpose, the Vikings eventually wound up doing the right thing. They did.
It's hard to see it in the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, it took them long enough, but they finally got it. The NFL, on the other hand, I don't think the NFL still has any idea what they're doing with this. And part of it I understand because there really is no playbook. There really is no precedent for this whole thing. But at the same time, I mean, you've got Troy Vincent apparently talking to Adrian Peterson on the phone and saying, yeah, if you plead out to this and blah, blah, then you're going to have 2 more games added to your suspension, then you're going to be able to play. And then Peterson does that, and Goodell says, oh, never mind, we're going to suspend you for the rest of the season. The National Football League is just flying by the seat of their pants on this one pretty much. And it's frustrating because, you know, I like I said, as far as Peterson coming back to the Vikings, at this point, I just want the whole thing to be over and to be resolved one way or the other so that it feels like this team can finally move forward on something, because it seems like everything is just kind of on hold while the league and the Vikings and Adrian Peterson and Adrian Peterson's dad, apparently, I guess, who may be the only person who knows less about this than I do, decide exactly what's going to happen with this entire situation. Because whether we know he's going to be back or he's going to get traded or he's going to get cut, like I said, everything just sort of seems to be on hold with this football team right now.
Very true. It's a frustrating place for everybody to be. Now, we're getting to the point where we're about to hit clock time. We've got another interview coming right after you, so I'm going to kind of have to jab you at the poker and force the quick answers out of you, and I apologize for
Not
that.
a problem.
But with the Adrian Peterson thing, as it stands right now, I mean, does the team want him back? Does he even want to be back? Like you said, his dad's getting involved. I think he wants out. I think he feels that there's some level of betrayal and the team didn't stand by him and support him beating the hell out of his 4-year-old or whatever is going on in his head.
And that's where the disconnect seems to be. I mean, the Wilfs have said they want him back. Rick Spielman, the general manager, has said he wants him back. Zimmer said he wanted him back. Every player that's been asked about it has said they want Adrian Peterson back. And Adrian Peterson, for whatever reason, just says that he doesn't feel comfortable or whatever, and that the team didn't stand by him. Well, I don't know how many of the proverbial grenades Adrian Peterson was expecting the Vikings to throw themselves on for him. But, you know, it stuns me that the guy seems to be offended at the fact that it came out that, like you said, he whooped up on a 4-year-old child, and people were offended by that. And of course people are offended by that, because that's the kind of thing that offends people. I don't understand it.
I like your way of thinking. It's similar to mine. Like, of course you're offended. How could you not be?
Yeah.
It's like the color blue. How do you describe blue? It's blue. I don't know. Now, that brings me to my next question. In a year of like controversy regarding the name Redskins, we saw the Vikings fans not at all okay with that when the Redskins came to town. I'm like, interesting. Okay. Minnesota leading the way on social issues. Not saying that that's totally shocking. I just, nobody else really. All right, cool. Now, it's easy to be the guy standing in the right when it's not your team, but when it's your guy and your face of the franchise doing the wrong stuff, it's a lot harder to do that. Mm-hmm. You've had 1 billion comments on your webpage. Uh-huh. You've read through quite a few of them. I know there's going to be the ones and twos, but where is the general fan consensus on this? Do they stand with Adrian Peterson, or do they believe him to be in the wrong on this child discipline / child abuse thing? What is the fan perspective on this?
I think a lot of the fan perspective is a lot like what I talked about earlier, and that everybody just wants it to be over with. Whether it's Adrian Peterson coming back, whether it's Adrian Peterson being traded or getting cut or whatever, you're always going to have the hardcores on either side, the people who think, or people who will say, oh, yeah, it was just a guy disciplining his child. It's none of anybody else's business. You have the people on the other side who are like, oh, he's evil, spawn of Satan, that kind of thing. And the vast majority of folks are kind of in between and just want the whole thing done with one way or the other. The thing is that, we were talking at this time last year about the fact that, going into this season, Adrian Peterson's going to be 30 years old, and, he's going to have a cap figure of $15 million, which is way more than any other running back. And there were thoughts then that Adrian Peterson might not be part of this football team in 2015. And I'm not sure why anything that has happened over the past 12 months is a reason to not think that way anymore, because he's not getting younger. I don't think he's going to be, the Adrian Peterson of 2012 by any stretch. But, like I said, pretty much everybody just wants this entire situation to be over one way or the other, just so we can move on and get on to, the rest of the team and the rest of the season.
Fair enough. All right. That's generally how you would kind of expect something like this to go. It's very difficult to jump in and have a moderate opinion on something as incendiary as, how we're raising our children. That's not a war you want to parachute into.
No.
No, thank you. Getting to the point, about to wrap it up. Before we go, we need to get your thoughts on what is the realistic expectation this upcoming season. First, we want to know where you think they're going to be going in the draft. And secondly, what do you think is going to be the outcome next year? Are we going to be seeing more wins, less wins? Whereabout do you think the team will finish? What do you see happening next year?
As far as the draft, I mean, if you would have asked me on Friday night after the Mike Wallace trade, I would have said that, they're probably looking offensive line, possibly looking, defensive side of the ball. Then Saturday, the team releases Greg Jennings. That puts wide receiver back onto the board as a potential at number 11, pretty much. So the Vikings, I think, are kind of in a position at this point where they can really sit back and look at their board and say, okay, who's the best guy out there, regardless of position, and take that guy, whether it's another receiver, whether it's a defensive guy. They can just kind of sit back and, take whoever they feel is the best fit for this team. Now, in 2015, with Teddy Bridgewater continuing to improve, hopefully some improved play out of the offensive line, I don't see any reason why this team can't win 10 games next year if the defense continues to improve. A couple of the other teams in the division seem to be falling off a little bit. Detroit losing most of their defensive line. The Bears, with all due respect to you guys, I don't know what's going on in Chicago.
That's okay. Neither do we.
But I think those two teams are going to be a little bit weaker. Obviously, the Vikings lost 3 of the 4 games against the Lions and the Bears last season. They could improve sort of at the expense of those teams, I guess. But like I said, as long as the defense continues to improve and Teddy Bridgewater continues to get better, I don't see any reason why this team can't be 10-6 and possibly fighting for a spot in the wild card round, or, depending on what happens with everyone else. I think this team is a playoff contender next year.
Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. We have to wrap here. Unfortunately, okay. I'm real sorry. But before we do that, I do want to turn it over to you real quick. Go ahead and just give everybody your Twitter, the page and the web address, and kind of give anything else out there that you want to talk about real quick, or any points you want to make, or anything like that.
Well, we're at www.dailynorseman.com. Twitter handle is also Daily Norseman. You can get our Facebook page from the website there. And other than that, I just appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a great discussion, and best of luck to you guys going forward.
Chris, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you on again, especially right after the draft. I'm going to want to pick your brain and see what you think. As you said, you're in a great position with that number 11 spot. Definitely a lot of options, a lot of talent in this draft. We're going to need to get your take on that.
Looking forward to it. Just let me know, and I will be here.
Expect either some tweets or an email, or I know it'll be tough just to get you on the phone right away, but would definitely expect us to want to get a quote from you in some way, shape, or form.
All right, sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Once again, that was us talking with Christopher Gates of the Daily Norseman. Very exciting getting to have him on and represent the Vikings. I was very pleased with that.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome, especially coming from a guy who has to have a lot on his plate to not only be pretty much the editor-in-chief of a SB Nation website, but also a full-time active duty member of the United States military. That's pretty awesome.
And being stationed in Europe, having been stationed in Italy for 3 years myself, I can confirm it is pretty difficult to keep up with NFL news. It's almost impossible to watch the games because you have to deal with Armed Forces Network or pay to download them on your laptop. And even then you can't watch them on game day and all the headache. So definitely a little bit more than I think is the norm for an editor there to have to put up with a little extra trials, but he knows what he's talking about. That is certain.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like I was weary coming into this one because of just the logistical stuff, my preparation stuff and connection issues. I was just real worried about that, but everything turned out great. I mean, and he does, you're right, know his stuff. And if you're not listening to their podcast that they have on their homepage, and if you're not reading their stories and going to them for some of the news, then you're not doing something right as a Vikings fan or as a fan of football, to be honest.
And if you're a fan of football, figuring out about Football is America from the Daily Norseman, we welcome you and we invite you to come and check us out again. Our website is footballisamericapodcast.com. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, a whole bunch of other things. Give us a chance. Well, we'll probably let you down, but whatever.
You will. Don't forget, you can also email us at fbiapodcast@gmail.com, or you can also get us on Twitter at fbiapodcast. So we're all of those places, and I'm very excited for Chris to get all of this out for us, and he's going to be a great addition to kind of our contact team.
Definitely a worthwhile addition, and we will be looking to hear from him come draft time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you to our military. Thank you to everyone. We hope you had fun. We had fun. And we hope to have you join us again.
Good night.